Okay, let's not muck around. The good, the bad, and the ugly of the 2025 British Grand Prix. So, let's get into it. Okay, I know Lando Norris took the win at his home Grand Prix, but dear God, let's talk about Nico Hulkenberg, who on his 239th attempt scored his first podium, and a massively overdue one at that. And you know, in these modern times where for every one piece of good news, there's 5 pieces of bad news, something like this, a Hulkenberg podium, in the F1 world anyway, was just what we needed. And it was absolutely glorious. It was on merits, there was no technicalities or dodginess involved, and it was a showcase of what a cool, experienced head can do in seriously crazy conditions. And just another example of when the car, strategy, and driver all come together beautifully. And you know what? In modern F1, I know it's very trendy and on brand to put a young rookie in the seat, but you know what? Sometimes you just need a bloke in his late 30s. I mean, he started in 19th place pretty much at the back of the grid and stunned everybody by ploughing through to 3rd place, proving all of his doubters wrong. And you know what? He might have even reinforced Audi's decision that entering Formula 1 might actually be a good idea. And if you just started watching F1 recently, Hulkenberg is always been one of those drivers who had the talent but never really had his shot at a top team, and his stats don't really seem to kind of represent his talent. And I have no doubt he could have been a race winner in the right seat. And it's also great for Sauber because not only has this catapulted them up to 6th in the standings, it could also be the team's last hurrah before Sauber disappears from Formula 1 entirely and we are replaced with the Audi Formula 1 team. But you know what? I am so happy for him because every single driver out there deserves to have a moment. Everyone should have a moment. And Hulkenberg never really had one. It was always this thing of what ifs and should haves, but finally he's got that moment. It was just one of those where were you type things, and you know what? Fair bloody play to you, Nico. You deserve that. Now that that chip is off my shoulder once and for all, let's get on to the race winner, Lando Norris. And you know what? Norris often gets unfairly labelled as a bit of a bottler, the guy who drops the ball at the key moment or makes a silly error that backfires and ruins his race. But you know what? Here at Silverstone, Lando, I think, gave probably the most mature, level-headed, and yet unassuming performance of his career so far. He kept his head down and it massively paid off. And with that, it was just sensible through and through because early on he didn't try and bust a gut trying to catch Piastri and Max when they were well in front of him. He just sat back in 3rd place on a good strategy and just let the race unfold in front of him. And unfold is actually what it really did. Once the situation with Oscar and Max had passed, he didn't really make any fuss or rush to get by. You know, just let Piastri serve his penalty. It's not Lando's problem, so no skin off his back. And once he was in the lead, Lando may as well have just been driving around in a hammock, sipping a mojito, because I have never seen him so cool, calm and collected. And because of that whole race that he executed brilliantly, he now has a place amongst this elite of British drivers who have won their home Grand Prix. And so what now? Well, Lando now has this wave of momentum that Oscar doesn't. The whole situation has been flipped around, the points gap has been narrowed, and we now have a serious championship fight on our hands, so watch this space. Now, next up in the good is a guy who drove well beyond what his Ferrari is capable of, and that is none other than Lewis Hamilton. And it was easily, pound for pound, the best and bravest performance I've seen him put in a Ferrari. He kept it together, no collisions and plenty of overtakes too. But of course was denied a podium right at the end because just the car and the tyres just couldn't take it anymore. Now, in contrast to what Charles Leclerc was able to dish up, Hamilton showed that his knowledge of Silverstone and driving in the wet was absolutely invaluable. And I think without all that, and Hamilton too, Ferrari's British Grand Prix would have been an absolute disaster. But between you and me, thank God he didn't catch Hulkenberg in the end. Now, next up on the list is a guy who was an absolute fighter and scrapper at Silverstone, and that was Pierre Gasly. Now, I've always had a bit of a soft spot for drivers like Pierre Gasly because he has enough talent for the team to lean on him. He can pull off massive results in the right circumstances, but sadly, unfortunately, will probably never get that top drive he deserves. And it's really one of F1's great tragedies because at the British Grand Prix, Gasly put in a absolutely heroic performance for an Alpine team that really just appears to be on the ropes at the moment. They're absolutely rooted to the bottom of the constructor standings with no real quick fix options available. And Alpine should really count themselves bloody lucky because Gasly put that car into positions that it has absolutely no business being. And also in the rain and changing circumstances, and it kind of felt like watching it that Gasly was just channeling his inner Jean Alesi or something. One of those drivers who in the wet anyway can be counted on to deliver the goods. And with this whole horror show going on at Alpine on the other side of the garage, if Alpine want success, they're going to have to do everything it takes to secure Gasly long term. Now, making a rare appearance in the goods section this time, it's none other than Lance Stroll. And I say this because throughout the race he held it together. He didn't have any complications. He had quite a simple running strategy, bringing the car home 7th and also moving Aston Martin right up to the tail of RB in the constructor standings. Now the thing is with Lance Stroll, he might remind you of that kid that you might have gone to school with who was probably a bit annoying, a bit disruptive, didn't get the grades, didn't really put the effort in, didn't really care overall. But then when he applies himself properly, when he's properly motivated, he can deliver. And let's face it though, he is that sort of driver that everyone just loves to pour criticism onto. For example, if he had had an incident at the Grand Prix or had an accident or something, it would have been hilarity and there would have been content creators everywhere pouring fuel onto the Nepo baby fire, perhaps including myself, but I can't comment. But in a team like Aston Martin, where Alonso is expected to deliver almost 100% of the goods, behind all that, Lance Stroll has just been quietly plugging away and getting on with it. And what we saw at Silverstone was just another example of this. He's undergone a complete transformation from last season. I'm not quite sure what it is, but whatever he has done, it's worked. He's like he's had a word with himself or something. Okay, so now that's the good section over, and now we move towards the bad of the British Grand Prix. And so without a shadow of a doubt, I'm starting things off with George Russell. Because this was a catastrophic example of Russell and Mercedes trying to overcomplicate things and be a bit too clever for their own good. And what I mean is when Mercedes decided to pit Russell just after the formation lap to put him onto a new tyre strategy, it all just went wrong from there and it was completely unnecessary. And yeah, without a yellow flag or something, it may have worked, but any race we see in the opening 1 or 2 or 3 laps, there is always a yellow flag safety car of some sort. So with that, I really don't know what they were playing at. It was one of those huge gambles that didn't need to be made and it didn't pay off. And it didn't pay off in the way that the casino takes your house, your sofa, your TV and your dog. It was simply a strategy gamble that didn't need to be done. And if he qualified back in 18th or something, fair enough, take the gamble. You've got nothing to lose. You've only got everything to gain. But starting in 4th, you know, in the wet, George Russell's not too bad. He's quite nippy. He could have easily ended up in a podium position. And from there, it just went from bad to worse because there was multiple strategy switches, excursions off the circuit, and it all resulted in just a single point. And of course, he was bloody lucky to get that too. And so with this whole thing of Lando Norris winning his home Grand Prix going on in the background, it does put George Russell's situation at Mercedes into perspective. And you realise that there is still this thing of overcomplication going on at Mercedes where the team and also George Russell himself still feel that there is this need to come up with $1 million answers to $10 questions. It is just not necessary. So yeah, frustrating. George threw away what could have been a perfectly good race. And why is that? Maybe when it comes to the crunch, he lacks that little bit of percentage of confidence in himself. So now if George Russell showed us what happens when you're trying to be too clever, Williams, on the other hand, showed us what happens when you are not being clever enough. And also what I sense might be a lack of guts at the team right now. Now, although both cars finished, which is a bit of a rarity, it was just such a disappointment that with all the changing conditions, all the DNFs, all the chaos that was going on, Williams was not really able to pull much out of the bag. With all the possibilities that the chaos of the British Grand Prix opened up, Williams were able to provide nothing. And it's just when you think of the teams that seem to have, on paper anyway, a worse car than Williams, such as Aston Martin or Sauber or Alpine, all of them grabbed a decent haul of points at the Grand Prix. And with Carlos Sainz once again trailing behind Alex Albon, Williams were unable to produce any sort of beneficial tactical or strategic calls, which might have lifted one of the cars into the top 5. Now, I do believe Williams will get back to success, but I also do wonder, are they playing it a bit too safe? You know, perhaps being a bit too unadventurous or even a bit beige in terms of risks. But despite all that, we can still see progress at Williams, because 12 months ago, had Albon scored 4 points at the British Grand Prix, there would be an absolute party. But because of the fact that everyone's feeling let down, feeling that the team could have done better, it shows that the expectations are now a step higher. And that's got to be a sign of progress in some shape or form. Now, next up was a very difficult choice, and that is Max Verstappen, because not only was he caught up in the Oscar Piastri heavy braking safety car shenanigans, I sense that the red mist that descended over his eyes shortly afterwards is what actually ruined his race. And this is something that we have seen with Max Verstappen before. Something bad happens or an injustice happens, the red mist descends, and then it's game over. I mean, there's no doubt that Max and Oscar will have a full-on chit-chat, if you want to call it, after the race, but there is still this question of who is right and who is wrong. I mean, up until that moment, a solid second or third place was in the bag, but however, though, he was still able to claw back 5th position, and that was fairly impressive. But I do wonder, though, with everything going on behind the scenes, all the rumours around Mercedes and a move to them, and this situation that we saw at the Grand Prix, could this be the final straw with Red Bull? And you know what? If I was Toto Wolff, I would see this as the perfect opportunity to put an arm around him, empathise with him, and potentially even make him promises about future seasons that Christian Horner simply can't. And I have a feeling it might be, but we'll have to see if this race is going to be the catalyst which is going to decide Max's future for 2026 and onwards. Now, next up on the list, my old favourites, Haas, had a dreadful showing at Silverstone. With all the chaos and DNFs and changing weather and everything, they were not able to score a single point. The F1 equivalent of not being able to arrange a piss-up in a brewery. And what makes things even worse and even more embarrassing is that Ocon and Behrman needlessly collided towards the end of the race, making unnecessary work for the poor people back at the factory. And perhaps a sign of Ocon bringing his old Alpine ways over to Haas. But what I did see is that this race highlighted for Haas a massive flaw within their system, because this team, they don't have that solid driver that in changing conditions or whatever can make a solid difference like their competitors have. And what I mean is that Haas, on its better days, have an average car, and it is driven by 2 fairly unspectacular drivers, and from that, you're not really going to expect massive things. And this is something that they need to sort out pretty quick, because Nico Hulkenberg used to do this for Haas, but now, as we saw, he's doing this for Sauber. And so for Haas, no points, teammates collide, disaster of a race. But now, if anyone had to top off the bad category for the British Grand Prix, it would have to be Oscar Piastri. A race that he was really nailed on to win, were it not for his 10-second penalty from the whole safety car jamming it on the brake shenanigans. Now, we all make mistakes. I usually defend and believe what Oscar says, because this sort of thing was quite an uncharacteristic move from him. He would never really do this sort of thing. But then you also have to factor in that moment is that there's water spray everywhere, the mirrors on the car basically do nothing, and then when you get the notification that the safety car's coming in, you've got to let the car go, because otherwise you're going to be catching up with it in a few seconds, because after all, these are Formula 1 cars. Now, Oscar was obviously furious about it after the race, saying in several interviews that he didn't want to talk about it because he'd just get in trouble, but I sense perhaps that he's more annoyed with the McLaren team for not informing him of this on the radio as it was going on. It's like they kind of hung him out to dry a little bit. But whichever way you look at it, it was a bad call, it was a bad move, and it allowed Norris to close the gap on him in the standings, and thus making Piastri's life just a little bit harder. So now, moving swiftly on to the ugly of the British Grand Prix. And you know what? I'm going to kick this off with the rookies from the 2025 season. Now, if this Grand Prix showed us anything, is that it's actually pretty great to have a more experienced driver, an older hand in your team who knows what he's doing. You know, maybe perhaps someone who's a bit jaded, but otherwise calm and docile in otherwise testing and stressful situations. But what this race and the entire weekend I think did expose is the general flaws of the current crop of rookies. Now, most of them have actually put in decent showings and got a good haul of points, but they are all in perfect conditions. And what I mean is, of course, there's no wind, a nice hot and dry track, and lovely sticky tyres. However, though, throw them into a rainy weekend at Silverstone and it's quite clear why teams still have a demand for drivers like Hamilton, Alonso or Hulkenberg. And so with all the rookies finishing towards the back or even retiring, it surely can't be a coincidence. Now, having one of these fresh drivers within your team or as a rookie driver comes with all sorts of benefits, and it's completely understandable why a team might go down this route. And it's because they're cheap, they want to impress, they're relatable to teenage boys and girls, so you can flog all sorts of merchandise. And therefore do excellent PR for the team and sponsors. You know, wear this, go there, say this, and shut it. And they don't really complain and do what they're told. And that's not really something you kind of get with a driver who's 30 plus and has a back catalogue of broken dreams and promises. And so this might serve as a gentle reminder to some teams that perhaps a kid straight out of F2 or F3 may not be the best solution if your team, car and strategy are not quite up to scratch. But on the other hand, you can't really blame these rookies because how much wet weather running do they really get? How much time do they actually get to drive in the wet before the safety car comes out, the red flag, hanging around and just waiting for the rain to disappear? Barely any, especially in this day and age. And I sense they just don't get enough laps under their belt to really hone their skills in the rain and just make themselves more adaptable and changeable to these conditions that can flip at any time. And it's races like Silverstone, and there'll be many more later in the season which could massively expose this. And so on that note, if Cadillac want to go ahead and sign Perez and Bottas, or even Ricciardo, why the hell not? And so guys, thanks for watching another episode of The Good, Bad and Ugly. I hope you enjoyed the race. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Let's chat about it. And also leave the channel a like, share and subscribe if you enjoyed. And on that note, I'm Paul and I'll see you later. Cheers.